These planes saved a Soviet design bureau and possibly the lives of their designers during World War II. Though they were simple and rugged fighters, developed from earlier designs, and were mostly constructed from wood, they still managed to become one of the most successful Soviet fighter family of World War II. These were the Lavochkin La-5 and the La-7 designs. So let's see the history of these fighters today. The story of these fighters started before World War II broke out, when Lavochkin and his colleagues designed the La-1 and La-3 fighters, which were the direct predecessors of the LA series. The first of their designs, the La-1, was developed in 1938 for a design competition to replace the Polikarpov I-15 and I-16 fighters. And it was the work of Semyon Lavochkin, Vladimir Gorbunov, and Mikhail Gudkov. This fighter was a modern design for its time, a low-wing monoplane built around the Klimov M105 liquid-cooled engine. But despite its modern design, the fighter had many faults. Its engine was underpowered, it had a short range, and to save on strategic materials, the fuselage was mainly built from wood, making it overweight. It first flew in March 1940 and managed to reach a top speed of 600 km an hour, but according to the test pilots, its handling was very poor. Nonetheless, it was quickly ordered into production, as the Soviet Air Force needed planes to replace the losses suffered in the winter war against Finland. As the first La-1 fighters arrived to the units for evaluation, their shortcomings quickly became obvious. Unlike the hand-built prototypes, the build quality on the serial production models was very poor, and sometimes they proved to be slower than the old I-16 fighters. But since the production lines for the new fighters were already set up, the TSKB decided that instead of dropping the project, improvements had to be made on the design. Changes on the control systems, weaponry, a lighter airframe, and additional fuel tanks solved the biggest problems, and the improved production variant, the La-3, showed acceptable flying qualities. Its mass production started in January 1941, and when Germany attacked the Soviet Union in June the same year during Operation Barbarossa, the La-3 was the most modern fighter in the Soviet Air Force. The most modern, but definitely not the best fighter, as the upgraded La-3 model was still underpowered, and overall it was considered a failure. Its production barely lasted longer than a year, and ended in the second half of 1942, when the factories were switched over to the more successful Yakovlev fighters, and the La designs were relegated to second-line duties. The series of failures resulted in the design bureau falling from the parties and, more importantly, from Stalin's favor. This put the designers under a lot of pressure. In the Soviet Union, a failed design, or sometimes just missing a deadline, was often considered a sabotage against the nation, and the unlucky ones could easily find themselves in a work camp or in front of the firing squad. But let's rewind a bit. By the end of 1941, Lavochkin was already notified by his friends in the party that he was in trouble, and he had limited time. He already knew he and his team could only keep their bureau, and probably their lives, if they were to come up with a design that still doesn't use strategic materials, shows big improvements over their previous failure, but will not introduce too many changes, so its production can be set up fast, based on its predecessor. Lavochkin hoped the problems will be fixed with the new Klimov M107 engine, and that will cure the fighter's main weakness of being underpowered. But the new power plant proved to be problematic and was delayed. The saving grace, however, arrived in the form of the new Svetsov M82 radial engine, which provided much more power than the former Klimov M105 used in the La-3 fighters. Though Lavochkin initially was against the use of the radial engine, as it weighed 250 kg more than the planned power plant, and because of its larger diameter, it needed modifications on the front of the fuselage. But having no other choice, they had to make it work. The team had no time to design a completely new aircraft, as they were running out of time. Stalin's patience could run out any day. So they pulled a half-built La-3 fuselage from the production line and modified it to accommodate the new engine. As it turned out, the weight difference caused less problems than anticipated, as the shorter radial engine sat closer to the plane's center of gravity than the earlier inline one, and the removal of cooling system, oil coolers, and other equipment almost negated the difference in weight. Looking at the pictures of the La-3 and the La-5 side by side, we can clearly see how the new model was just a modification of its predecessor. After several modifications to the cooling and oil system, the prototype made its maiden flight in March 1942 and showed better speed and climb rate than its predecessors. The Red Eagle engine was more rugged and more suited for field operations, and it was more resilient to enemy fire as well, while the new fighter, with its two 20mm cannons, was also better armed than the fighters it was based on. In April 1942, Stalin was notified about this new fighter and its performance, and the fact that its production could be set up in just a month or two. The state trials took place through April and May, and though many problems were found with the prototype, the test flights confirmed the performance increase on the new fighter. The new aircraft initially was just called LAG-3 M82, then later appeared as LAG-5 with a single G, as Gudkov left the design bureau by that time. And finally, in September 1942, it was officially designated La-5. The new design, after the initial problems were fixed, was ordered into production in July the same year. The development of the type, however, didn't stop when the type entered mass production, so next we will take a look at its main variants. Production of the first La-5 series started in the second half of 1942, and the first models featured a conventional cockpit, the M82 engine producing 1,600 horsepower, and initially they weighted 3,376 kilograms. But by the end of the year, this weight was reduced to around 3,200 kilograms by modifying the fuel system, armament, and removing the rubber coating on the fuel tanks. Experience showed these were ineffective against the heavy cannons used on the German fighters. At the fall of 1942, work on the upgraded La-5F variant started, which on top of the earlier mentioned weight reduction, featured the new Svetsov M82F engine, now producing 1,850 horsepower. Thanks to the modifications, this variant had a top speed of 600 km an hour, but its range was reduced to 760 km because of the elimination of wing fuel tanks. But the most prominent and easy to spot difference the F variant introduced is the cutaway on the fuselage behind the cockpit, giving the pilots much better visibility. The next La-5FN model was developed in 1943, when various tests were conducted to find the cure for the Lavochkin fighter's poor range. After wind tunnel tests, it was found that sealing the engine cowlings, oil cooler tunnel, and the cockpit for air leaks resulted in about 20 to 30 km an hour gains in speed and also improved the range. The other main problem the fighter suffered from was the poor quality carburetor on the M82 engine, which was fixed with the M82FN engine, which featured direct fuel injection. The easiest way to identify the FN variant is the large air intake on top of the engine cowlings. With all the modifications, this model was able to reach 648 km an hour speed and had a range of 1000 km. In 1943, the fighter was also tested with the M71 engine, which, though it had a larger diameter and weight, could deliver 2200 horsepower, a considerable improvement above the M82. Though the flight test showed higher speed and performance, in the end, reliability problems of this engine and the aerodynamic drawbacks sealed the fate of this variant. The La-5 UTI was a trainer variant, with its armament reduced and featured a tandem seat cockpit. The final development of the type became the La-7 variant, which was developed in the winter of 1943, early 1944. Initially named La-5 Standard of 1944, it was later designated La-7, as it featured so many modifications compared to earlier models. The La-5 series fighters were mainly built from wood, making them slightly overweight. But by 1944 it was clear the strategic materials will not run out. So the new variant used many metal parts in the fuselage and the wing spars instead of wood, making it lighter than its predecessors. It also featured modified oil coolers and air intakes, and many other smaller modifications based on the experiences with the earlier models. The La-7, during its flight tests, managed to reach 680 km an hour speed, but its fuel capacity was reduced, resulting in a range of just 635 km. Its armament was usually the same 2 20mm cannons as on the La-5 models, but some variants featured an additional third cannon. The La-5 was 8.67 meters long, with a wingspan of 9.8 meters. It had an empty weight of 2,706 kilograms and a maximum takeoff weight of 3,402 kilograms. The fighter was powered by a Svetsov M82FN air-cooled radial engine, producing 1,960 horsepower. With this engine, it could reach a top speed of 648 km an hour. Its range varied between 750 and 1,000 km, depending on the variant, and it had a service ceiling of 11,200 meters. Its armament consisted of two 20mm cannons mounted in the engine cowlings, and it could carry two 100-kilogram bombs. The first production La-5s started to arrive to their units in fall 1942 and immediately made a good impression. They were easy-to-fly planes, and the pilots who flew the earlier LAG-3, I-16 or MiG-3 fighters easily adapted to the new planes. The maintenance of the new Lavochkin fighter was also easier than many earlier designs. The simple and rugged air-cooled engine was more suited to the frontline conditions. The wood airframes, however, though they were rugged and could take a good amount of combat damage, were sensitive to the weather and moisture. The La-5s quickly showed their superiority over the earlier Soviet frontline fighters, and at low and medium altitudes, below 4,500 meters, they were more than a match for the German Bf-109 or FW-190 fighters. The more advanced German designs had an advantage at higher altitudes, but most engagements on the Eastern Front were fought at low altitudes, giving the Soviet pilots the advantage. Apart from bomber escort and fighter cover, they were also used for ground attack missions as well, carrying bombs and rockets. The improved variants of the plane started to arrive soon as well, the La-5F versions in early 1943, then later that year the FN models. In mid-1944 the reworked La-7 variant appeared, but the La-5FN also stayed in production until the end of the war. The new faster variants were usually issued to interceptor regiments, while the earlier versions were used at frontline units. By the end of the war, the La-7 mostly replaced the La-5 models, and this more advanced variant stayed in service until 1952. Some of them were even used in the early stages of the Korean War by the North Korean Air Force. But despite being a respected World War II fighter, here it was quickly outmatched by newer, more advanced designs. Though this Lavochkin fighter started its life as a desperate attempt to upgrade its predecessor, the LAG design, in the end it turned out to be one of the most successful Soviet World War II fighter family, and though they are not as well known as the Yakovlev designs, they had a big part in the success of the Soviet forces in World War II. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and in the comments let me know if there's any interesting events or vehicles you'd like to see.